Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming today. I just want to give a little introduction to our speaker. She is an American lesbian LGBT rights activist who in 1994 moved from her hometown in Kansas to New York City to build a career in staffing and recruiting. She later became part of a team of investors that saved and reopened the Stonewall Inn, which became the birthplace of the modern gay rights movement after the 1969 Stonewall Riots. She is the co-owner of the Stonewall Inn and co-founder of the Stonewall Inn Gives Back Initiative. And this is a nonprofit charitable organization that is committed to eliminating social intolerance that profoundly impacts the lives of LGBTQ citizens throughout the world. And it is with great pleasure and the deepest honor that I introduce to you Stacy Lentz.
Thank you, guys. I'm going to take this out. I'm a walker-talker because I get passionate when I'm up here talking. So let's see if I can do this. Okay. I feel a little better. I know the professors like the podiums. I like to be out here doing this. So first off, how many of you have heard of the Stonewall Riots? Hopefully most of you have, right? I want to talk to you a little bit about that and kind of display some myths today because I want to talk to you about Stonewall, what happened on that particular night, past, present, and future. So let's really talk about what happened on June 28th, 1969, and why did that particular night, of all the raids that happened at LGBTQ and gay bars throughout the city, why did that night become something that sparked the revolution of LGBTQ rights around the world? Now, a lot of people will say, well, it was the Vietnam War, right? I mean, that was very much a part of it. Also, women's rights, civil rights. Actually, during the 60s, America at that time period was ready to bubble up. It was a part of our history where Americans were fed up with oppression on every level. Every group of others was fighting back. Funny enough, much like today, right? 50 years later, we still have to worry about all of us, all the others, getting all our rights taken away. So the irony is not lost on the 50th anniversary. So when you take a look at that and the oppression that was going on, especially for LGBTQ people, they didn't have a safe space. Even the Stonewall, which at that time period was a mafia-owned gay bar, had no running water. All the walls were black. They flocked there because that was the only place in New York City in 1969 where they could be openly LGBTQ, right? It was also illegal during that time period for people to dance with members of the same sex. So 2 women and 2 men, if they were caught dancing in a club, were arrested. Another interesting fact was that if you were a member of a certain sex or certain gender, you had to have clothes that matched that gender. You had to wear 3 articles of clothing that matched your gender, or you could actually be arrested, which is just crazy to think about. I think I would actually go to jail right now, right? So that's what would happen. Many of us in this room would actually be thrown in jail just for how we're dressing. So the oppression that was happening, especially to the LGBTQ community during that time frame, was just insurmountable. They were tired. They were sick of it. They couldn't even do anything outside of those 4 walls. And also the mafia during that time period that owned the bar would pay off the police because the police would come in and do raids periodically throughout the 60s. So they would pay the police off so that way they wouldn't lose their liquor license and they would stop arresting their patrons. So it's also interesting to think about, you know, the mafia in a weird way, even though they didn't provide sanitary conditions, were at least better than the rest of the general American public. The mafia were kind of the good guys in this case. At least they provided a safe space. On that particular evening, in addition to all the social unrest in the country, there's myths around this, of course, was the fact that Judy Garland had died. Judy Garland had died a few days prior, and she was being, her funeral was being held up in Harlem, and she's being laid to rest. So a lot of people say that the LGBTQ members were very, very upset because she had passed. It would be like us losing a Lady Gaga or a Madonna today for the queer community. So they said that was part of it too. Now, again, I like to believe this myth because of I'm from Kansas, right? So the Wizard of Oz. But I'm not sure that this myth is absolutely true or not. But they do say that. It was also very, very hot, which was another thing. And there was a full moon. So when this particular raid, on that particular night, June 28th, 1969, happened, I think it was a combination of things where people were just fed up and tired. The police raid started around 1:20 a.m. in the morning on Friday morning, but patrons had been there obviously since June 27th, Thursday night. They came in and they started doing what they normally do during raids. It's line people up against the wall, start checking their ID, start checking to find out if they didn't have the clothing that matched their gender. They would definitely throw them in a paddy wagon, have them arrested. And then also, they would also not let the people, if they were dancing together, they would also arrest them for that. There was actually a siren, a blue light, that would go off inside the Stonewall to let people know to separate, because here comes a police raid. That's how often this was happening during that time period. So again, on that particular night, they started doing that. And again, myths and legends, who knows what's true and what's not. As they were taking people to the paddy wagon, one myth is that a drag queen threw a heel back at the police, and that kind of revved up the crowd. Another legend or myth, or could be truth, we don't know, is that a lesbian was bully clubbed and cried out, "Are you going to do something?" which incited the crowd outside of the bar. But in reality, I think it was just probably a group of people who at any point had been pushed to the brink of oppression for so long that anything was going to set them off at that moment. And that's kind of what happened. And when that did happen, and when the police came in with the raid, instead of normally going down to the jail and being bailed out, they decided to fight back. And outside, hundreds and hundreds of people gathered on Christopher Street in front of what is now the Christopher Street Park, which was made a national monument by President Obama and the Obama administration in 2016. Gathered out front, and hundreds of neighbors and people filed out into the street saying there's something going on at Stonewall, there's something going on at Stonewall. And that's when it started. And this was not necessarily a violent riot. There were some trash cans burned, maybe a car overturned. No one died, right? Maybe a few, black eyes. But this was the first time that queer people said, we're here, we're queer, get used to it, and stood up for the first time and fought back and resisted arrest, and also with their straight allies. A lot of allies came out from the village, too, that came down there. So it literally is considered the birthplace of the gay rights movement. The riots lasted for 3 consecutive nights with more than 3,000 to 4,000 people joining in at one point, chanting, fighting back, demanding equality, demanding rights. And again, that had never happened for the LGBTQ community up until that point. There were other things, like in 1966, it was illegal to even serve, they called it homosexuals, a homosexual, if you will, at a bar in 1966. They had to sip in at Julius's bar around the corner from Stonewall, which changed that, and that law changed in 1968. But this was really, and there was also the Compton kind of riots that happened on the West Coast. That was another time. But Stonewall was largely considered the birthplace of the gay rights movement, and the first time people stood up. And it wasn't just what happened on that particular night. It was also what happened afterwards. That's when people really also started organizing. The LGBTQ community got together in church basements, in fire departments, in gay bars across the country, and started organizing on a level that we had never seen before. Out of that became the Manishin Society, the Daughters of Libitus, all these different activist groups that came together and decided that they were going to form and get together and stop the oppression across the country. So that's also why it really changed the world. It was what happened after. We also have to talk about that a lot of this happened because of the street people that were very much outside the Stonewall, because they were very instrumental in forming different groups after that. And especially our trans people of color brothers and sisters Sylvia Rivera and Martha P. Johnson, who are often noted as very well-known Stonewall veterans. They organized street kids. They organized the trans community. They organized different groups and different minority groups and people of color in a way that had never seen before until after the Stonewall Riots. So it was incredible to watch their work and what they did after the riots as well. So after that, in 1969, about 4 months later, the bar closed down. It had a rated premises sign for months after that. We recovered that rated premises sign 4 years ago, and it now hangs in the entrance to the Stonewall Inn. We have many celebrities from all over the world, including Madonna, the Prime Minister of Ireland, the Mayor of Amsterdam last week, and everybody you can think of takes their photo in front of that sign because it was so iconic that this was a rated premises, and shows that it was rated just because it was a gay bar. Over the years from 1969, after the riots and after it closed months later, the building itself became a Chinese restaurant. It became a bagel store. It became even a shoe store for a while. So it was very interesting that over the years it had a different historic value than other than being the birthplace of gay rights or a gay bar at all. It reopened in 1989 as an LGBTQ bar that lasted, called Jimmy Pisano's, that lasted for about a year or two, and then reopened as the Stonewall as a gay bar in the 90s. It stayed open through the 90s and its early 2000s, but it wasn't really what you would think of as the birthplace of gay rights. Women were not often in there. I remember the first time I visited when I moved here from Kansas in 1998, and I walked in and I was like, wait, I'm the only woman in here, and this is like, this is our history. This is the birthplace of gay rights. What's happening? It was all typically older men. And so I knew in my head I wanted to change that with my business partners as soon as I got that chance, when we did. It also, at that point, was just not active in the community. So in 2006, the bar briefly closed, and my partners, Kurt Kelly, Bill Morgan, and Tony DeChico, two of them owned the duplex. One of them managed the duplex on the corner. We all decided to get together and buy it with a group of investors to save history. One of the first things that was on the docket was I definitely wanted it to be a place where lesbians went. I mean, that was really important to me. Important to my social life because I'm always single for dating. But it was also important because I understood how important it was to our community, right? And to make sure that our trans brothers and sisters were welcome. To make sure that our straight allies were welcome. To make sure that people of color were welcome. To make sure that everybody felt like the Stonewall Inn, which is literally the birthplace of gay rights, we compare it to, the church. It's the mega church. It's where people come to celebrate. It's people come to rejoice. It's where the community comes to gather. And we need to make sure that everybody that identifies in whatever way they identify under the LGBTQ umbrella gets to be represented by the Stonewall Inn. It is not just, we don't own it, the community in the world owns it, and we're aware of that. So we've got to make sure that everyone feels welcome there, and I think we've done a good job with that. Also, if you fast forward a little bit, we started working with hundreds and thousands of different organizations in terms of different groups and different people in nonprofits. We've done fundraising events for GLAAD, for the Human Rights Campaign, for the Trevor Project, for all kinds of nonprofits you can think of. We also started hosting football leagues and basketball teams and anything that we could think of to keep the story alive. We knew that we had a social responsibility and a moral obligation to make sure that everyone knew what happened there in 1969, because we really do believe if you don't know your history, you can't change your future. And that's really, really important to us, all of us, and even to everyone who works at that bar to this day. So we wanted to get the word out. To this day, we also have someone who was there that night. His name is Tree Sequoia. That's not his real name, but he goes by that, legit. Probably because he's 6'8" and looks like a sequoia tree. He was there the day of the riots, and it goes around the world for us and speaks about what that particular night was like, what it was like to live in the 60s, what it was like to be that oppressed. And he has worked behind that bar, and he turned 80 on Sunday, and he was working behind the bar on his 80th birthday. And he tells people the story of Stonewall and why it was so important and what it was like to live back during that time period to this day. 30 years he's been working at that bar. So incredible resource. But we also think it's just so important because a younger generation, when you're walking around and you can get married now, you can hold your partner's hand. There's so many different things that you could do, and you have no idea. The reason you have that right and that entitlement is it because of what people did for you in 1969. Legit, that's the reason why we have all these freedoms. They started that fight. What we're trying to explain also is that fight is far from over. So that's kind of looking at the past of Stonewall, but now I want to kind of talk about the present time and things of that nature as well. If you take a look the last 12 years since we've typically owned the bar, we've come so far in LGBTQ rights, right? So if you look at in 2008, Don't Ask, Don't Tell. That was the first time that was overturned from the military. So that was interesting. So what we did at Stonewall is like we told people if you come in your military uniform, because before that, you got to remember, and even up to 2008, you would not necessarily see a sailor, a Marine, or anybody in a gay bar because they literally could not serve. I mean, it was Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So in 2008, to see that overturned, we'd invite them in and say, hey, you can have a free drink on us or whatever it is in your military uniform. So that was just an interesting time. If you keep going a little bit further, in 2009, we worked to try and get New York marriage passed for the state of New York, and failed, by the way. But that was a thing where we also would gather, and we had a different event called the Stonewall Riots upstairs, where we would literally do fundraisers and parties and events and drag shows to raise money to send people to Albany to lobby. So that was a big thing. We carried that forward into 2011, when in 2011, gay marriage actually passed in New York State. And it was so incredible to see literally thousands of people packing the streets, just probably like what happened in 1969 in front of Stonewall. Everyone out there celebrating, popping champagne, just enjoying their life so much. It was magnificent to see that happen and to see that everyone knew to go to Stonewall and celebrate. It was just such an incredible thing to see. Also, then you fast forward a little bit later, 2013, DOMA, Defense of Marriage Act, is overturned, right? So that's another critical moment. Edie Windsor was a big person that made that happen for us, who's definitely an LGBTQ hero. She came in after the Supreme Court decision, and we had half her law team, and I remember getting a text like, Stacy, we can't get in the bar. I was like, oh, yes, you can. This is the reason why. They had worked for years to get this court case. So again, we could all get married. 2015, it passed federally. And then in 2016, we worked with the Obama administration to create the first ever LGBTQ national monument, which is really the park outside, right? Because we are still a private business inside. Don't want the government owning the most famous gay bar. So we kept them out of that. They own the park out front. That was an incredible experience, too. For me, growing up as a kid in Kansas from a small Christian conservative town, I never thought I would ever see gay marriage pass in my lifetime. And it was unbelievable to work with the President of the United States and his team to create the first ever national monument. I remember sitting on the couch the day when they decided to announce it, which was the Friday before Gay Pride in 2016. I have a friend who was staying with me from Barcelona. I picked up the phone and was like, what? 202, it's like 202, what's Washington, D.C., and I get on the phone, and they're like, oh, this is the LGBTQ liaison for the White House. First of all, who even knew we had one of those? That's awesome, right? I'm sure we don't have one now. Just saying. But to think that we had that was pretty incredible. And the fact that the administration really cared about that and to have that call, I never just thought I would see that in my lifetime. And it was overwhelming to see that. So working on those kind of things. And then if we also, as we went forward and saw all this happening and we understood, like globally, Stonewall is not just a bar. It actually is a movement. And it's not even just a movement. At some point, though, you have to think of how can we use this on a larger scale to impact more people, not just by keeping the history alive, how can we use this as a vehicle, not from just the past, but to put it at the current fight for LGBTQ rights around the world? And that's really when we started our own nonprofit called the Stonewall Gives Back Initiative. We understood that we had a right and responsibility to keep that fight alive and keep Stonewall at the forefront. And when we looked at what we wanted to focus on, we really wanted to focus on areas that were being neglected. We wanted to focus on areas where equality has been slow to arrive. It's pretty easy in New York City. It's pretty easy in LA. It's pretty easy in San Francisco to be LGBTQ. Where I'm from in Kansas, even now, in 2019, not so much. You go into the deep south in Mississippi, not so much. You go into Puerto Rico, not so much. And these are just places in the US. Forget about globally, right? So when we started doing research on this, we realized that's where the focus needed to be. First of all, I run our nonprofit. My partners run the bar. I don't even know what we charge for a drink. I couldn't even make you a cocktail if you asked me to. My job is to raise money and go speak and go around the country and work on the nonprofit, which I prefer. But having grown up in one of those states, having known what it was like to have that social stigma, understanding that 1 in 4 LGBTQ kids is likely to commit suicide, 4 times more likely than their straight peers. Understanding that 28 states still in 2019, you can be fired for being LGBTQ. Understanding that 50% of the population today lives in areas where they don't have legal protections from housing either. So you think about how far we've come in 50 years, but then you question, wait, we've got a long way to go. So there's pockets of the U.S. where it's easy. And then let's not forget about the daily social stigma that people in those places outside of major metropolitan cities face. So some of the things we've worked on initiative-wise, just to give you some ideas, we've held the first ever Rural Pride in Independence, Kansas, because again, you can think, well, that sounds strange. Visibility saves lives. Just knowing that they could have a pride in that part of the country, in rural southeast Kansas, literally can save lives. You understand that there are others like you in your small town. Then after the hurricane in Puerto Rico, we understood that in natural disasters, the marginalized become more marginalized. That's just what happens. So we work with grassroots organizations on the ground in Puerto Rico to make sure that LGBTQ people found housing and jobs. And it was called Porcha Marta, and they're an amazing organization. And then we looked again and started working with the Mississippi Equality Fund, because Mississippi is the only state in the country that has passed a religious freedom law. And if you know what religious freedom laws are, you hear that, and there's been 70 of them, and more than 70, just in the last 6 months, that were introduced at the state level. I'm here to tell you religious freedom laws are just a form of hate and a legalized way to discriminate. That's really what they are. They're saying if I'm Catholic, if I'm Jewish, if I'm Christian, if I'm Muslim, you come into my place of business, state-funded, private, doesn't matter, and I feel that you're holding hands with your partner, it's against my religion, I can just ask you to leave. And Mississippi is the only state that actually passed that law on a state level. So we went down to work with them in Mississippi and say, okay, let's try to build the first ever LGBTQ center in the Deep South in Biloxi, Mississippi. So it gives you some ideas of what we're trying to do with the initiative. We'd love to take it globally. We just haven't set that quite up yet. As you know, like Brunei just passed the death penalty. There's still 20-some countries for being LGBTQ where you can literally be killed across the country. Places like Uganda, Ukraine, have the laws. You could be stoned to death just for loving differently and loving and being yourself. So again, there's a lot of things that we need to do and to get that done. I also want to talk about a little bit about cause marketing, and because a lot of people don't understand what that means. or why to do it. And I know there's some people out there that think it's wrong. But partnering with corporations, a lot of people are like, well, why would you do that? That's not a good thing. For me, I will take corporate money all day long and give it to LGBT grassroots groups all day long. We will use corporate sponsorships whenever we can because it's almost like Robin Hood. We're going to steal from the wealthy and we're going to give to the poor. So anytime we can get them, we just have certain rules. You have to remember that Pride, we're getting ready for World Pride and Stonewall 50 coming up, right, which is a crazy time of year. So every corporation, every sports team, everybody you could think of wants to be a piece of this. And you may say why, they want to show their diversity and those things. And there are other people within our community will say, well, no, they want our $1.2 trillion in spending money, right? Because that's the truth. If you got all the LGBTQ people in the world, you put them in a country, we'd have the 4th largest GDP in the world in terms of countries behind the US, China, and Russia. So think about that. That's insane. So everybody wants what we call these pink dollars, okay? So in looking at that, we have some requirements. We're not just LGBTQ on Pride. We are LGBTQ and gay 365 days out of the year. So if you're going to partner with us as an organization, you're going to give the money to our charity, but you're also going to acknowledge you're not just going to throw up a rainbow sticker and be like, yeah, we want your money. Hey, we're diverse. You've got to be authentic in your branding and your messaging, and you can't pander to our community. We're too savvy as consumers not to understand how wrong that is. So that's really big, too. Some of the corporations and things that we've done, I'm just using them as examples, is we've partnered with the New York Yankees. They were the last holdout in terms of they've never had a Pride night. Now, every New York sports team has had some kind of Pride night. The Yankees have been heavily criticized for not doing it. So when we had conversations with them, they understood they had to go beyond just having a Pride night. They need to do something bigger. So we've been working with them to create a Stonewall Yankee Scholarship. And we spent a lot of time up there, and we'll be announcing that at May in front of the bar, and then June 25th on the stadium at Yankee Field, where we're giving $10,000 to an LGBTQ kid from each of one of the 5 boroughs in a scholarship to use whatever school they wanted to. They want to come here, they can use it here, wherever they wanted to go to school. So that's one example. We've also partnered up with Brooklyn Brewery, who have been amazing. And we said, listen, we want something 365, not just something to come march with us on Pride. They've been incredible partners. We created a Stonewall Inn IPA that supports the Stonewall and Gives Back initiative. We're launching it in 6 countries in 39 states. Shake Shack's going to be carrying it. And again, everyone understands those proceeds. So when you're drinking, you're actually drinking for a cause. So that's been an incredible thing. I like to drink in general, but I definitely like to drink for a cause if I'm going to drink, right? So that's a really impactful thing. And then we've also just partnered up with Saks Fifth Avenue. Again, we wanted to speak to them about their diversity and hiring practice and things of that nature to launch a Stonewall 50 collection that'll be coming out, where they're giving $100,000 to our charity and 30% of everything that's sold, where we have people like Stella McCarthy, Calvin Klein. I'm not, clearly, if you look at me, I know nothing about fashion. So I can't even pronounce the designers correctly, but there's a lot of them, and it's amazing. Christian Louboutin. So it's just amazing. But again, we went to them and said, you can't just hop in the Pride Parade and say, hey, we want you to come spend your money here, or that. We work with them, and we also really vet these organizations in terms of for our trans brothers and sisters as well. Do you have gender-neutral bathrooms? Do you have diverse hiring practices? So if you're going to use our Stonewall name and you're going to partner with us, we've got to make sure you have the right systems and things in place. And that's how we make sure that the community is happy and represents that as well. But those are some examples of cause marketing and those things in terms of what that means. I think if you look at the future, when you talk about the future of Stonewall, and I've been asked this question a lot doing interviews, like where are we at Stonewall 75? Where are we at Stonewall 100? Sadly, I think I'll be dead in both cases, but okay. But where are we in general in life? And I hope that we're at a place that we don't even have to have that conversation any longer in 25 years. That our identity our gender identity, our sexual preference is not something that is even talked about the way it is now. The problem in saying that is that we've made a lot of strides, and then also it could also be taken away very rapidly with one stroke of the executive pen. So we're moving backwards right now, and we have to remember that. We saw that with the ban, the trans-military ban that just happened on Friday. 13,000 service members are out of a job right now, right? So you have to think about that. And they just wanted to serve their country. That's all they wanted to do. Braver than me. Braver than a lot of people in this room who didn't sign up. They just wanted to serve their country. So you've got to look at these things. So I think there's a lot of things happening globally as well where we're seeing a backlash because we've come so far. And we've got to remember that that fight that started there in 1969 at a little bar on Christopher Street is not done. And that global impact can really be changed by people in this room. So I want to give you 4 key thoughts that you can do as a person to help us not lose the story, to help us not lose the fight, and also to remember that equality is it's not just about, when we say equality, yes, we think gay rights, LGBTQ rights, but it's really about all the others. And all the others have to come together right now. One of the first things you can do is just by being a great ally. If you're straight, be an amazing ally. And what that means is remembering that your LGBTQ brothers and sisters have probably struggled when they were younger. They may not have a home because of who they are. They may not have resources or been hired because they are. And just listen and give them their voice, right? And that's how you're an ally and you support them. So that's one of the things you can do. The second thing that you can do is you can volunteer for an LGBTQ organization. I know a lot of people, you don't have to give money. A lot of us don't have money, but a lot of people have time, right? That's the one thing that we all have. So we could look at that. The third thing that you can do, you've got to remember this, and this is so critical, and I think we learn this. I hope we learn this. Elections have consequences. So you've got to remember your vote and who you're voting for affects other people. So you might have voted for somebody, not saying you did, and I'm not going to go too much into politics because I could. I'll try not to, but you got to remember when you're voting, you're voting sometimes against your LGBTQ or the others, and that's wrong. And you might say, well, I voted with my wallet, not my my heart or whatever it is, and I voted for me. You got to remember that elections have consequences. And so you've got to kind of think about that vote for LGBTQ people, and I would implore you on that. And the fourth thing you can do is, and I'm really adamant about this, and I know this sounds crazy, but I think you need to also show up at LGBTQ events as an ally. Show up at the LGBTQ drag shows, queer bars, whatever there's. That's where our community gathers. Show you support that community. And you can do that also with your own dollars, even if they're not pink dollars, even if they're, if you're not part of the umbrella, you still can spend money on companies that support LGBTQ rights. I don't know how Chick-fil-A, okay. No, guys, no. I don't know how much I can say, so I'm sorry to the staff here. So I won't go on a whole tangent about companies I implore you to boycott. But that's really important. I mean, that's really a thing. I mean, you have the power in your dollars to spend it on companies that support everyone. And especially those within the LGBTQ community and all the others, whether it's immigrant rights, people of color, trans, whatever it might be. So you've got to remember those things. So again, I think that story that started there in 1969 is not done. But we need all of you to carry on that story. And we're excited. I invite you all to come to World Pride. There's going to be 4.5 to 6 million extra people. So I don't even know how I'm going to get into my own bar. I have no idea. But I'll try. But I want to thank you guys for listening and having me today. And I just want to open it up to questions for a little bit and see if any of you guys have questions.
Questions? Oh. How did you open up with your parents and tell them you're gay or a lesbian?
I'm sorry, repeat that one last time, sorry.
How did you open up with your parents?
How did I? It was tough. That's a great question. And it's really hard, and that's fair. And I talked to a lot of young people because, again, I had 16 kids in my high school class. I was at church every Sunday. I'm going to be 49 years old tomorrow. So it was a different, time period in the middle of a cornfield in Kansas in the 80s than it was today. It was tough. I didn't come out to them until I got to New York and I felt safe. Honestly, I didn't. And the first thing my mother said is, being religious, first thing she said is like, I love you, but you're going to hell, honestly. And then it was just like, the world is going to treat you unfairly. It's not going to be an easy life for you. And I think there's a couple things, but in my mind, as soon as she said that, I think something even more triggered. Tina Brandon, the Brandon Tina story, the whole Oscar-winning movie, Boys Don't Cry, that happened in 1994 in the town where my mom went to high school and where my grandmother was. So with me, when I was about 24 and thinking about coming out, it was like, guess what happens when you come out? You get killed, for real. That's how I felt. It literally happened 40 miles from my house, where someone was killed just for being LGBTQ. No other reason. So that's why I'm an activist. And then when my mom said that to me, I decided, okay, well, I can't change her mind right now. Guess what? I'm going to change the world's mind. All right, we're going to do it. Now, it's more like, and again, this is what I tell people, the same time it took you, kids are coming out younger these days, 9, 10, 15. They're starting to have an understanding. We have different language is important, right? So we have different language around what that means to be LGBTQ and in schools and safe places and everything like that. But the same amount of time it took you to realize you're LGBTQ, you've got to give them a minute to catch up. You can't expect all parents to be like, oh, this is great. I've had friends that happened to. That was not my experience, and I don't even think that happens all the time today. You got to give them a minute to understand the same way you needed a minute to figure out who you were, right? So you need to give your family a second. The other thing I would say to that, fast forward now, all this time later, my mom is super proud of me. She's met my girlfriends. We have a great relationship. And now she'll see me on TV or something. I'll be on a national news program. I was like, Mom, didn't you like what I said? And the only thing she'll say is like, your hair is still a mess and you need to wear makeup. So she's just a mom now, right? So that happens. Any other questions? If I can hear. We haven't. We've been very lucky at Stonewall that we have not had. It's funny. We have not had counter protests from the right. We've had counter protests from the far left, because they will say we haven't gone maybe far enough. Not just Stonewall, but in general, right? Because there's certain. You're going to see at World Pride this year 2 different marches. One is called, the regular World Pride, Heritage of Pride March, which is all the corporations, the big march, the governor and mayor. And there's another group out there called Reclaim Pride, who feel like you shouldn't have corporate sponsors, who feel like they're kind of anti-police because they feel like, police started this and police are still not good with the queer community or people of color. So they feel very marginalized when they see a heavy police presence and things of that nature. So yeah, we've had some counter protests on that end. Not really in New York. We haven't seen anything. Now, when I went down and I spoke in Mississippi, total opposite thing. I spoke at a Gulf Coast Equality Fest, 15 people, picket signs. That quote I said about it being the gay church, somebody, a right-wing Christian conservative blogger wrote that I should be killed for that. So there's some things like that. So, and I think that, you just adjust, and it comes with the territory when you're out there speaking. But no, nothing really at Stonewall on that end. Now, that could change, right? But I feel like New York is such a safe city. And by the way, as far as there's a Gay Officers Action League, which is a police group, and those are the people that protect us. And I happen to feel very safe with them there.
Questions?
Well, again, thank you guys so much.
Oh,
So I
there's
really
one more
appreciate.
One more question.
There seems to be, according to a lot of the gay press, that a number of the bars and gathering places have been closing. Have you noticed that at Stonewall? And what do you attribute that to?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've spoken on panels about just that, right? LGBTQ bars are closing at an alarming rate globally. And I can tell you exactly why. It's really because there's dating apps, right? So that's part of it. Grindr, Tinder, OkCupid. Where before, those were the places where you went. That's where you dated and mated, right? Let's be honest. It's also where you went to find your chosen family, to find people like you. So I kind of feel bad for the younger generation that only does it online. I think it's really important to build community face to face, but that's just my opinion. But so you're seeing that at an alarming rate. Also, as we've been more accepted by society, in some places, especially in New York, you could be making out with your girlfriend in an Applebee's and no one's going to look, right? No one's going to care. No one's going to give you a hard time. Again, that's not the true in Mississippi, but I'm using that as an example. So I feel like that's why you're seeing it happen. So I think that the online pressure, we become more social acceptable, can go to straight places. And I think sadly also, we've lost that sense of community, right? And it's also because there's other things. Identity politics are huge right now. So we are gay and this. We are lesbian and this. We are trans and this. And so we don't always feel the need for those spaces. And for me, personally, knowing that that's where our journey began at Stonewall. And if you want to say it was Julius's in 1966 for the Sip-In, or if you want to say it was the Compton Riots, gay bars for centuries have played a safe place, and they're such a part of our movement where we gathered and everything else. So they're critical to our culture to keep them alive. But it's apps, and it's definitely being social acceptance. So sometimes you know how you say, be careful what you wish for. That can be part of it. But yeah, they're closing, and especially lesbian bars because of the socioeconomic gap. As women, we still do make, what, 70 cents, 73 cents, something like that, less on a dollar. And gay men typically are maybe not as often. I hate to see someone to get killed, but it's true. We nest a little bit more as women in general, whether you're gay or straight. So we tend to get in relationships and have children. And I know when I see somebody out at the bar and I haven't seen them in a while, I was like, oh, they're in a relationship. Where if I see a gay man, I was like, oh, they're just out having fun again. So it's just like a different thing. And we don't make enough money, and there's not enough money in lesbian bars, which is super sad. There's like 2 maybe left in New York. There's none left in LA, and one just opened in San Francisco, with the one closed in Philadelphia. It's pure lesbian bars. In New York City, there's 55 gay male bars, 4 that I would call mixed: Stonewall, Cubby Hole, Ginger's maybe, and then Ginger's and Henrietta's are the only 2 that are really pure like that. So that's alarming, right? But that's true. And I blame social, economic, and just how women and men are different in terms of dating and mating. Sure. Not really, because we're a little bit of an anomaly, right? Because yes and no, because we've become such a tourist destination, right? I mean, we can rely on people from all over the world coming in. A lot of LGBTQ people, it's the Mecca. So as soon as they get off a plane at JFK, we might be their first stop. And I think people, interesting enough, know more about Stonewall and have learned about it because they actually teach, like in Netherlands, for example, they teach LGBTQ history since grade school. I mean, it's just a required course. So Europeans tend to know more about the history and know more about Stonewall than Americans. So it's interesting. We have not been as affected just because we're such a tourist destination, or yes, we probably would be.
Thank you for taking my question. But with so many hate groups that have risen over, well, certainly more in the last, say, 3 years than for a long time, and with the terrorist action in Orlando, what was your response, or what was Stonewall's response to that? Yeah. And how supportive have you been, or Stonewall has been, to that community in Florida?
Sure. And that's a great question. We get asked that a lot of times too. So for that, when Pulse happened, it was the same weekend as Brooklyn Pride. So I was probably on a dance floor somewhere at 3 a.m. And then I immediately got a call from my business partner, Kurt Kelly, who runs the inside the bar, who said, oh my God, this is what happened. The police immediately then reached out to Kurt, and we had machine guns out front by 9 a.m. They were not joking around. We didn't know, it was still being investigated. We didn't know if they were going to target other LGBTQ bars. We didn't know if it was one or two people and things of that nature. The police stayed with us for around a month. And we had SWAT teams on the roof. We had machine guns in the park. And the city was no joke. Just knowing how critical Stonewall is as an iconic institution for New York City, but as the, it is the gay bar globally. It is this symbol of gay rights. So we didn't know if we were going to be a target or not. So they were incredibly supportive. Now, what we've done, I've had numerous conversations with Barbara, who was the owner of Pulse at that time. They have started a foundation, and they will be up during Pride, and it's called the Pulse Foundation. And what they're trying to do is give money to surviving members in forms of scholarships to their families and things of that nature. And scholarships sometimes in the name, because so many people in that tragic shooting were so young. So they do that. And so Barbara came to Stonewall. God, I'm going to say she was there for last year Pride, and maybe even right after Pulse she came and was on a Friday and gave a talk. And so they're really trying to do some different things around there. And so, yes, we try to help their foundation whenever we can.
Hello. Perfect. I just want to ask you something about, two things. One is a question, the other one is like, since you have a lot of experience of everything that happens to you, I just want to know like a little about, for us youngers that don't know too much about the war. So my first question is, what is the best impact that you have, like the best protest? Because, apologies that I came late, but I just want to know that part. And what would you tell us, the youngers, since we don't have nothing on the experience like you?
Yeah, I think I've got that. Yeah, the biggest impact I think we've had is just being able to use that bar as a place, still as a vehicle for change, using it constantly through our nonprofit, through our marketing, through branding, everything like that, and using it and going around and doing what I'm doing today, right? Because I go speak all over the place, and I enjoy that, to educate a younger generation about that. As far as what you can do as younger people to get more experience, there are a ton of LGBTQ nonprofits, even here in New Jersey, that you could volunteer for. And just get out there and start having those conversations and look at some of those nonprofits and see if you can volunteer. They're always looking for volunteers. So that's my best bet to you. So look at, and that's one of the ways to get started. Even before I bought into Stonewall, I was definitely borderline pretty decently sized big activist, and now it's really blown up. But I was always trying to do outreach within the community and volunteer and have conversations and do events and work with all different nonprofits, even if the event wasn't at Stonewall. Just showing up is half of it, right? Just showing up. Any other questions? All right, thank you guys. You guys have been so great today. I really appreciate it.